This happened about 10 years ago when I was still in high school. I've always had the occasional prophetic dream. Now that I'm an adult, it happens less often, but back in my teens, it was a regular occurrence. However, this story isn't exactly about a prophetic dream. It was more of a waking dream, or rather, half dream, half reality. It's hard to put into words, but I'll try to recount the sheer terror I experienced. At the time, I was obsessed with a specific memorization technique I'd seen on TV. It's a method that allows you to memorize over 100 items in strict order by linking them to familiar places. Some of you might know it as a memory palace, but here's the gist. First, you visualize a place you know well, like your home. You map out a route, the gate, the entrance, the living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, and so on. Ideally, you set about 10-inch stations per loop. At each station, you attach an object you need to remember. For example, if the first item is a plastic bag, you imagine it snagged on the front gate. If the second is a mandarin orange, you see it sitting at the front door. By repeating these loops, anyone can memorize 100 things. My friends and I even competed to see who could remember the most. Because I practiced every day, the images in my head became incredibly vivid. One night, I had a dream. In the dream, I was slowly walking through my house. I knew I was dreaming, but the state was fragile. It felt like I was just practicing my memory. The house looked terrifyingly real, and the air felt heavy. In the living room, I found a list of items. Right there in the dream, I started practicing. I memorized the items one by one, but there were only about 40 items on the list, which felt like too few for me. The objects were all very ordinary. Surprisingly, when I woke up the next morning, I remembered all 40 items in perfect detail. I thought to myself, wow, I'm even starting to do this in my sleep. At school, I told my friend Kenta about it. He listened and asked, hey, those things on the list, are they all actually in your house? I was surprised by the question, but I said yes, because they were. If I had seriously thought about the meaning of his words then, I might have avoided the nightmare that followed. A few days later, the dream returned. Same practice session. I headed to the living room where, as expected, the list was waiting. I picked it up. Item 1, a newspaper. I walked out of the house toward the gate. That's when I noticed someone outside. It was an old woman with a baby carriage, hunched over, gray-haired. She was staring intensely at me. I didn't know her, but I ignored it and hung the newspaper on the gate to lock it into my memory. Item 2, a crowbar. Interestingly, in the dream, the items appeared in my hands instantly. I leaned the crowbar against the wall by the entrance. Item 3, a baseball bat. I placed it on the shoe rack in the hallway. Item 4 made me uneasy. Kerosene. A canister appeared in my hands. I carried it to the living room. I should have stopped there. Item 5, a kitchen knife. How strange. It was nothing but dangerous objects. With growing anxiety, I put the knife on the kitchen table. Item 6, duct tape. Finally, something normal. I left it in the laundry room on top of the washing machine. Item 7, cement. Confused, I dragged the heavy bag into the bathroom. Something was definitely wrong. I realized I was in a lucid dream and decided I'd finish one more loop and then force myself to wake up. Item 8, a rope. My room looked exactly like it does in reality. I threw the rope onto the bed. My eyes fell on the trash can. It was stuffed with something black. Looking closer, I recoiled in horror. The bin was filled to the brim with long human hair. I ran out of the room. My heart was pounding in my throat. The dream was wrong. It was macabre, but I'd never been physically hurt in a dream before, so I kept going. Item 9, a screwdriver. I left it on the toilet lid. Item 10. A gas heater. I placed it in the corner of the second floor room. Item 11. A piano string. We definitely didn't have one of those at home. But suddenly, the thin steel wire bit into my palm. A vague fear was building, but I fastened the string to the bottom step of the stairs. The first loop was done. It was creepy, but I chalked it up to a weird subconscious quirk and decided to do a second loop to reinforce the associations. That was a fatal mistake. I walked out to the gate. The list now read, lighter. Suddenly I heard a sound. The sound was coming from outside the gate. That same old woman was trying to light the newspaper I'd hung there in the first loop. I lunged forward, snatched the lighter from her, and screamed, "What are you doing?" Luckily, the paper hadn't caught fire. The old woman stared at me in silence and then simply vanished. With trembling hands, I hid the lighter in the mailbox by the gate and stood frozen at the entrance. This is just a dream, right? The realism was terrifying. My intuition, which had sensed the paranormal before, was screaming at me to run. But I tried to calm myself. It's my dream. If things get too bad, I'll just wake up. I checked the list. Next item. Tire chains. I left them by the doorstep and went inside. The list updated. Doll. We didn't own any dolls, but just like the string, one appeared in my hands. It was a traditional Japanese doll. It looked familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen it. I placed it on the shoe rack. Then I looked at the list and froze. The next item was fire. Fire? How was I supposed to? And then it hit me. The kerosene canister from the first loop was in the living room. Was I supposed to? At that moment, a metallic crashing sound echoed from the hallway. I peered out cautiously. Someone was outside. That someone was wrapping the tire chains I'd brought around the front door handle, locking me inside. I backed away in a panic and bumped into the kerosene canister. The liquid surged out, spreading across the floor toward the door. The sound of the lighter. I had put it in the mailbox myself, somewhere someone outside could reach. The fire ignited instantly. Flames raced along the trail of kerosene. The entrance became a wall of fire. The smell of smoke was unbearably real, and worst of all, I could feel the heat. This wasn't just a dream anymore. Some malevolent will had hijacked it. If I die here, I'll die in real life, the thought pierced my brain. I checked the list desperately for a way out, but it only said, ankle. A sound started. Something was being dragged across the floor. I looked down. The Japanese doll from the hallway was walking toward me, dragging the baseball bat from the first loop. It was impossible. She was moving with purpose. I tried to jump over her to reach the laundry room, but with incredible speed, the doll swung the bat. The blow hit my legs. The pain was blinding. How could a dream hurt this much? As I writhed on the floor, the doll reached for the kitchen knife. And then, it happened in a flash. My right foot was gone. The doll, with a completely blank face, picked up my ankle and neatly placed it on the kitchen table, as if ticking an item off the list. Bleeding out, I crawled toward the laundry room. The duct tape was there. In a delirious haze, I wrapped the tape around the stump to stop the bleeding. My mind refused to believe it, but I understood. I was being systematically dismantled according to my own list. I tried to wake up. I squeezed my eyes shut, screamed, commanded myself to open my eyes. Nothing worked. The doll appeared before me again. My arms and legs were suddenly taped firmly to the floor. From the bathroom, a new sound. The cement. Someone was mixing it with water. On the list, the word appeared, wrist. An invisible force dragged me into the bathroom and plunged my left hand into the rapidly hardening mass. There was a sickening crack. My hand tore off. The doll calmly picked it up. The pain became a dull throb. Shock was taking over. I crawled toward my room on the second floor, hoping to throw myself out the window. If this was a cursed zone, maybe everything would end outside the house. Near the toilet, the screwdriver was plunged into my back. A force threw me onto the second floor. It smelled like gas. The heater cable had been cut. The lighter again. With my last bit of strength, I rolled down the stairs a second before the explosion. A sharp pain in my head. My right ear was sliced off by the piano string I had stretched across the banister. The house was engulfed in flames. I collapsed into my room. A noose made from my rope hung from the ceiling. In the trash can, those hairs were writhing. And there on the window, blocking my path to safety, stood the doll. She wasn't going to let me out. I was thrown against the wardrobe. My consciousness was fading. This is the end, I thought. And in that moment, the list fluttered down in front of my face. There was one final item. Koinobori. Koinobori are windsocks shaped like carp. In Japan, they are flown to celebrate Children's Day, traditionally Boys' Day, representing strength and success. In that second, I remembered everything. From the wardrobe behind me, a blinding divine light erupted. It was so powerful, it instantly swallowed the flames, the doll, and the entire nightmare. I heard only one final, horrific death scream from the doll. I opened my eyes. I was lying in my bed. Hands, legs, ears, everything was where it should be. It was 7 a.m. I could smell breakfast from the kitchen. I went downstairs and looked at the calendar. May 5th, Children's Day. Why are you up so early? It's a holiday. Go back to sleep, my mom said. I sat at the table and told her about the dream and what I had remembered. When I was little, I was bought 2 sets of dolls for Children's Day. One was the mighty hero Kintaro. The other was the General Minamoto no Yoshitsune. I liked Kintaro, but Yoshitsune seemed boring. One day, I decided to play with him. I took him out of his glass case and made him fight monsters. The game got violent. I drowned him in the river, spun him on a rope, and finally, I blew him up with a firecracker. Terrified of what I'd done to such an expensive item, I hid the mutilated doll in the furthest corner of the wardrobe. I told my mom he was just in the way, and I never thought of him again. My mother listened in silence, then whispered, I see. Yoshitsune-kun must have been very lonely. We went to the wardrobe and pulled out the boxes. Kintaro was fine, but the Yoshitsune doll looked horrific. We spent the whole day fixing him. I painted over the chips and restored his parts with model putty and spare pieces from my robot figures. My mom spent the day at her sewing machine, repairing his tiny armor. The next day, the restored Yoshitsune looked even more majestic than before. I sat on the floor with legs tucked under the thighs before him and sincerely apologized for what I had done as a child. For the rest of May, that doll held a place of honor in my room. I understand now. That dream was a harsh lesson from a doll that had suffered for years in the dark, forgotten by the one he was supposed to protect. The dream stopped after that, but there is one detail that haunts me as I write this. That old woman at the gate. The cursed zone of the dream was limited to my house and yard, but the old woman was standing outside the gate, beyond the borders of my home. I haven't seen her since, but I can't shake this terrible feeling.